Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's coaching session. We are just waiting for Janessa to join us because we're going to do something a little bit different today. She's going to put me on the hot seat and she's going to ask me a number of questions and open up the floor for Ask Me Anything. So a little bit of difference, a little bit of difference on what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to give her just a moment. I'm pinging her right now to see where she is. And then we'll get going. So give us just a moment here. In the meantime, I will say for anybody that's just joining us for the first time, we do this coaching every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. 3 p.m. Eastern and noontime Pacific. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat or drop them into the Q&A as I'm opening up those now. We now have Janessa joining us, so we are good to go here. Janessa, how are you?
I'm good, Brian. How are you?
Good, thanks. So, today we're going to do a little bit of a hot seat. Janessa's been out meeting with a lot of partners. She's been asking them a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to the best of my ability, answer those questions and show any of the things that need to be, or that our questions kind of show how they're done inside a VCIO toolbox. So with that said, Janessa, why don't we kick things off with, what are you getting as some of the questions? What's the first hot seat moment you got for me today?
Okay. So with the launch of Cybrance, you have mentioned that we have over 30 frameworks supported, including NIST, HIPAA, CMMC. So for an MSP just starting a VC or VCSO service, how would you recommend that they pick up the first framework to implement through Cybrance? And how do we justify that to a non-technical client?
Perfect. So this question oftentimes comes up even when I'm talking with customers, a little bit more so when when the customer is not bound by a regulatory act. So they aren't expected to do, a NIST 800-171, or they're not forced to do CMMC or HIPAA or one of the other regulations. But what they're really trying to do oftentimes is build a much stronger cyber program for themselves. And when you're looking at building a cyber program, what you're really, for the mainstream customer that's non-regulated, what they're trying to do is ensure, hey, if something happens, will insurance pay out? Am I doing the best practices to ensure that I'm safeguarding all intellectual property, customer information, employee information, and making sure that that can't be hit? And do I have just overall the right processes in place? Oftentimes, when companies are looking to kind of adopt a cyber program, they're looking to put in that governance layer too and say, okay, it's all well and good that we put in the tools that we need to support it, but how are we managing over that? And usually the best two frameworks for kicking that off would be either the CIS version 8.1 or it would be the NIST CSF 2.0. And I'll get into some of the pros and cons in each. A lot of times the CIS is utilized because of the implementation groups. They basically have broken that assessment into three simple implementation groups, numbers 1, 2, and 3. And those of you that are familiar with those CIS, you're probably aware that, implementation group number 1 really fits well with where a lot of the MSP community is providing services today. It's really geared for customers that have less than 250 employees. They don't have an IT department. They're usually outsourcing services to a managed service provider or an IT consultant. And they're traditionally using common off-the-shelf tools, meaning your Sonic Wall firewalls, your Windows operating systems, your Dell PCs. There's not a whole lot of customization necessarily going into their environment. So in implementation group number one for CIS, there's 56 controls that live within that group. And it's really a good starting point for building your cyber program, as many of the insurance companies out there have also looked at kind of CIS as one of the mainstays for kind of mapping their controls or mapping their applications to it. Now, taking a little bit of, or getting a little bit more acceleration over the last 12 months has really been the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. And the main reason that has been taking a little bit more of an accelerated approach is because of the governance layer that comes in. Now, many of you know CIS did add some governance into version 8.1, but really the controls didn't change. It was just how they classified the controls, taking some of them and saying, hey, these are now governance controls. They're more about oversight. Whereas NIST CSF 2.0, as many of you might be familiar, really built out a governance layer and said, we now have to build out a program where there is oversight. And when you think about many of our small to mid-sized businesses, they almost work on that operation or operationally with the concept of, hey, if it's plugged into a wall or something like that, the MSP is in charge of it. And we need them to understand that security, and especially the oversight of security, is a shared responsibility. So if you're really looking to make that type of, type of statement with your customer, I think the NIST CSF speaks very well to it, as that governance section really allows you to do, to manage over that process. And then you go into your traditional identify, detect, protect, and the other NIST qualifications to make sure that you've got the right technical procedures and process in place. And that is probably my closing statement on which one of these 30 of the 30 frameworks, these are the two I would use for the more general business that isn't bound by regulation. I would also say that, when you're looking at that, another hot area is to start thinking about incident response too. In both frameworks, but a little bit more so in this CSF, do they talk about really respond and recover activities? And I think that's often overlooked. It's often thought, hey, from a customer perspective, not the MSP, of course, but it's often thought, hey, as long as I got a backup, we should be able to recover and there's not going to be a lot of downtime. And I think we all know that, most small to mid-sized businesses really haven't clarified what their recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives, those RTOs and RPOs are. And we need to work with them really to be able to, get them to understand that, hey, don't think just because we have a backup, all of a sudden as the MSP, we can get you turned up real quickly. And a lot of times when you start using frameworks, you can use them to your advantage in having these conversations with your customer. Hey, the reason we're building out these frameworks is because we want you to understand there's limitations on what we can do. And the more, and sometimes time is truly money. Can I get you to 1 hour recovery point and within 15 minutes? Sure, it's going to cost you up here maybe. But hey, what do you really need? What is your exposure? When you work with the customer through those base checklists, you're going to identify what their exposures are. What are some of the costs that they can incur for downtime? What is the risk of that downtime? How long can they truly be down before it impacts revenue? They might not have access to a system and they really can't process orders if they're, supply chain based. That's going to impact revenue very fast. But if I'm a dentist, I'm a doctor, I might be able to still see my patients, although I might have less access to the records, but I can still see them, meet with them, and keep that train a humming for maybe a day, two, before it's going to become very gnarly from a paperwork perspective. So we really want to nail those issues with customers too. And all of these components, governance, the core tools that you guys supply that really help with, identifying, detecting, and protecting, and then some of the incident response and recovery is really going to help them build a sound cybersecurity program. Nothing to do with compliance, but really just a strong program to ensure that they're taking the best steps they can for a business.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan.
You
So
bet.
I've had a few subscribers mention that they're mainly using GRC, but haven't explored their risk management features yet. And they're curious. So, like, what are some of the key capabilities within the risk management module, and how should MSP start using it to add value to their clients?
Yeah, so risk management is really kind of cool. I mean, I say it that way, but it really looks at the bigger picture. One of the limits of some of the frameworks, and I'm sure many of you on this call have experienced it, is they are very security focused. And when, and when they're compliance bound, let's just use CMMC as an example, it's really focused on CUI, the class, the unclassified data that we might be holding for those Department of Defense customers. So it's very focused on that security, caring, data flow angle, but it's not really looking at the asset lifecycle and asset management risks. It's not looking at user risks sometimes, across the board, only as it relates to those areas. So when you start looking at risk management, what we're really trying to identify there is what are the risks we're facing and what are the likelihoods and impacts if they were to come true. This is the number one reason, and again, thank your other MSPs for educating us as an organization. But this is the reason we've taken the risk register, which is a very common technology used in the GRC planning approach, and extended it out to the QBR so we could catch those risks like asset risk that are often found in that environment but not necessarily put to a level of impact and likelihood. So what the risk register really does for you allows you to take these gaps you identify when you're working on a framework assessment, whether it's on the GRC side of the system or the QBR side of the system, and then take those risks and look at it objectively and say, hey, how is this going to impact my customer? And what is the likelihood based on the way they're architected that this is going to occur? In essence, what we're building right there is some prioritization. Which risks carry the most weight? Scorecards are wonderful. I love our scorecards. They're beautiful traffic light approaches to what's going on. But to get to a yellow or red, it's usually multiple controls that are contributing to that score. And it's not really saying which of those controls are the highest priority when you just look at it from the scorecard level. So now we can help the customer better assess which tasks do I need to get done first. The other thing, it really takes the unique qualities of the customer into account. I've had many clients ask us, why don't you guys just preset the impact and likelihood ratings? And the reality is it varies from customer to customer. Let's pretend, the control that I'm looking at right now is, do you have an adequate perimeter security system, i.e. a firewall, right? That's at my front end of the system. Well, depending on how I'm architected, that could have two levels of impact. If I'm running a hybrid environment inside my office where I've got servers that still live inside my office and cloud applications I'm working with, well, that firewall is probably protecting more sensitive data on those servers than if I'm just running my desktop environment and all my applications are cloud-based. So it's not an equal impact. If somebody were to breach that main firewall in my office, and look, you guys can debate me on this concept here, but if they penetrate that firewall and come into my office, they can only get as far as the desktop level. And if we've done a good job of locking down our desktops, redirecting people's folders, and really minimizing the amount of data that lives on those PCs, it should be a relatively low impact, maybe a 1, 2, kind of impact. But if I have my servers inside there and I've got my main ERP system in there, which has all my customer data, my drawings, a lot of my intellectual property, and that's still a self-hosted environment, well, I think if somebody penetrates into my environment through my firewall and can get to that data, it's going to be much more impactful. So we might want to rate that a 4, 5, at least a 3, right? So that's why we can't make impact judgments up front. Same for likelihoods. Likelihood really becomes the story of the firewall that's protecting you. Now, I think when I make this statement, you'll all agree with me. If you inherit an environment that's got that 5-year-old Netgear consumer grade firewall in front of it, we're probably going to say the likelihood of being breached is going to be much higher. Now, here I'm going to take a little careful consideration because on any week you guys can get more excited about what firewall's right, and every week a different firewall is having a problem. So I'm going to just go with whatever manufacturer you've chosen for your business. You've chosen a good business class firewall. And if that business class firewall is in place with up-to-date software, up-to-date firmware, an existing UTM license, with the advanced features, making sure that, there's minimal, or that it's best practice protecting your environment, we've taken a lot of risk off the table and the likelihood of that is going to be much smaller. So what we're really trying to do is, quantify those risks for our customers so they get a better understanding of which ones they need to attend to. The other thing I really like about risk management, Janessa, is it's not just coming from our frameworks. We can bring any kind of risk into the system. If you look at the risk categories, I think our system comes with out of the box. I think it comes with operational, financial, and security, if I remember correctly. But in our reference tables, you can build any kind of risk you might want to track there. So you can expand out to other departments if they don't have a good risk mechanism and bring their risks into our system. While we show both framework and control when we tie a risk to a control question, we do have the ability to build those freehand risks. And what are examples of freehand risks you might want to bring into your risk management process? Well, depending on where you live, fire, flood, and earthquake considerations are something you want to look at. Almost every area of the country has some different natural disaster threat that they can potentially experience, and we might want to catalog those as risks that can impact availability of systems. We also want to look at risks like mergers and acquisitions. When we're going through a period of acquiring companies, there's a risk that comes with every one of those acquisitions as well. When we take on those infrastructures, even if we had time to do diligence in front, we still might be accepting an infrastructure that isn't quite yet to our standard. And we're going to have to take time bringing that network to our standard. And that's certainly not something that can oftentimes happen overnight. So one of the things that we want to ensure that we're doing during this process, is cataloging those M&A risks so we know where that risk might live within the environment and we can take steps in the short term to reduce that risk. If we bring on a new network, maybe we're doing some VLANing or restricting some of their access to some of our core assets until you get that network up to snuff. And by identifying that risk and putting an impact and likelihood to it, now you can have a much easier business conversation. Customer might not know why you're restricting some of the access to the main ERP for this new location. And you might have to help them understand that. And a risk assessment and a risk register approach is definitely a great way to do that. So that's a little bit about risk. I'm sure I'm missing a number of other things we could talk about there, but it's really meant to be something that can help prioritize which things need to be attended to first, or at least better understand what risk we have out there if we're going to accept that risk and not move forward with a project.
Cool. So I know in one of our most recent coaching sessions, we talked about QBRs and QBR killers and what not to do and what to do. What would be your top three things that every MSP needs to do to be successful in their QBRs?
Well, one, don't wait till the last minute to prepare. You want to have a script or a story going into a QBR. And what I mean by a story is really understanding where the pain points are and be able to drive a conversation that ultimately shows those pain points and allows you to then get to the next step. And what I see too often is that the QBR becomes this race at the 11th hour. We get the information into our TAM's hands, they rush through an assessment. We look at the data quickly, or we think we can wing it, right in a meeting. And oftentimes we don't know the context of some of the problems. For any of you that have looked at our Power QBR process, which is found inside our university, we talk about 28-day cycles on the QBRs in prep. And that doesn't mean you're working on them for 28 days. It's giving teams the appropriate time. The first week is making sure, or the first 2 weeks is making sure your engineering team has time to go through the assessment, that they can go in, they can identify where the gaps are, and they've got adequate time to do that. And again, they might have multiple assessments, so that's why we give them 2 weeks. So it can be slotted into their regular work. We want to give them a buffer. If you do have the privilege of having a service delivery manager, they can schedule that time so these people can go into these various assessments and do it over that 2 week period. Then we suggest the VCIO has it for a week. At that point, it's really so they can look at what the engineers have done. They've got time to ask questions and give the engineers time to answer those questions as they put in their final assessment points, like what recommendations, tickets, and steps need to be taken into the review. They might need to interact with their account managers or other purchasing counterparts to get budget direction as well during this time. So I often say give yourself a week per assessment to kind of prep that information. And again, if you're in the VCIO role, you might be prepping 4 at the same time, but you're still giving yourself a week to kind of close the gap there. And then I used to like to have what I called the cool it week, which is you've identified the issues, but now we're a week away from the assessment. We really don't want to make changes to the report per se, but any of those gaps we identified that were really on us, meaning that we created tickets, that they were things that we needed to do under contract. This might give us enough time to get those resolved and get them off the report and return things back to a good state before we have to share and prepare that for the customer. So problem number one is definitely not giving yourself enough time to prep and not going into that meeting with a story that you're willing to share. The second thing is not inviting the right people, and more importantly, when you invite those people, helping them understand what the value is they're going to get in that meeting. I'm sure all of you in this on this call today, because I know what happened to me when I was doing my QBRs back in the day. I couldn't get past my point of contact, or my point of contact wouldn't really try incredibly hard to get their leadership teams into these business reviews because they don't need to get into it. Or in some cases, they might have even been a little bit defensive. Hey, I don't want them thinking you can do without me kind of thing, right? So we got pigeonholed with that point of contact. But we've got to work with the point of contact to let them know why it's important we have other people coming into our meeting. Hey, Janessa, I want you to invite your CFO into the meeting at least 2 quarters out of the year so we can really discuss the roadmap. One quarter we want to introduce the roadmap, help them see what the big picture is, and then each year, in that same meeting time frame, refresh what's coming up 2 years out from there. We want them to at least continually be familiar with what are the big capital requirements that might be coming down the road as early as possible. So if we need to make adjustments, break projects into phases, find alternative financing as an example, we can do so. Then we want to have them in another quarter to review spend and make sure they're extracting value. We want to make sure after we've done some projects, we have a touch base, and a QBR is a great setting to do that, to understand, do they feel like they got the value out of it? Can we reinforce the why behind the project, redirect them back to the strategy page and go, hey, we completed these projects and these were contributing to this goal, this challenge. Did you feel some relief when that project got put in? Did you streamline a process? Get that feedback back and reinforce it. But you can only do that if that person comes to the table. But if the way you get them to the table is by driving value. In the first meeting, hey, we never want you to be caught with a gotcha. We want you to be in control of where the chess pieces move. We've suggested a plan. That doesn't mean it's the right one for you. We're suggesting it from a technology priority perspective. You're going to come back to me as the CFO and tell me that's all well and good, but I can't bite off all those projects. C projects might become A projects because there's budget available. A projects might have to go to the back of the line and become next year initiatives. And now we have to accept whether we're willing to take that risk that long because the customer doesn't have budget. And if we're not having conversations with the people in control of the purse string, we're certainly not going to get those answers. Same for the CEO, as an example. When we look at some of those senior management people, CEO, COO, if they're not in tune with it, we fall into the risk of the curse of the great MSP. And the curse is very simply, for those of you that have never heard me say it, the more we automate, the more we do remotely, the less we're on site and the less things break. And when we hit that point in time in our lifespan with a customer, that often means that they're going to question our bill, they're going to question our existence. They might even go outside and look for people that are cheaper. So we've got to have some value drivers to bring people into the meeting. And similar to the CFO, I would offer up to your point of contact, hey, we want to bring the CEO in so we can jointly share that we have a strategic plan together. You take ownership. Always make your point of contact the lead and you're the backup when we're in that type of situation. But say to them, hey, we want them to understand what goals we've identified with others on the team and make sure they align to the better corporate vision. We want to show them where the technology roadmap meets the business needs so they understand when we're making recommendations for budget requirements, that we're not just doing it because we see shiny toys that we want to bring into the environment, that there is a quantifiable process that's showing, hey, these projects will help support these goals and bring some relief to some of the pressures you might be feeling around it. And that's how we can get the CEO back into the meeting. And if you guys think I'm joking, the only reason we built this tool is because I had these problems and these were the steps I took to get other people coming in. And if you can bring them value that shows that you're looking out for their business, you're being a good steward with their money, and you're trying to help keep them in control of what they feel is the unknown. They don't understand technology like we do in most cases. Then they will come into those meetings because now they see, hey, this is a value hour for me, and I'm only being asked 2 to 4 of them a year. So that's problem number two. If you're not getting those right people in the room, it's probably because you're not positioning the meeting the right way, and you're also not addressing the point of contact's potential fear that you're going to show them up. Always go in with that mindset that, hey, I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you, Mr. Point of Contact, get that budget that you've had a tough time securing in the past for these projects. I work for you, in that essence, and really let them know that they're in charge so they don't feel any threat if one is felt or perceived there. And I guess, Janessa, if I was going to look at the third problem with the QBR, it's now after the QBR. If you don't follow up and you don't take control of your action items, you're going to have, all the goodwill you got during the QBR can be then thrown out the window if the problems lay out there. And look, I have challenges with this to this day, right? A lot of action items come into some of our meetings and it's easy to drop a ball. AI tools have made that a lot easier. Doing these meetings on Zoom and Teams allows us to get those AI notes so those action items are captured very easily. But the real problem is if you don't work with your team to execute on them, especially in a managed services agreement where some of those problems could be prohibiting, people working the way they need to work. If you're not following up on them regularly and then checking in with the customer after they're being completed just to make sure that everything's good, they're feeling it, they feel the improvement and things have been taken care of, you could be setting yourself up to be sitting in a seat where you're getting attacked in the next QBR. And attacks might be a little strong of a word, but that you're coming in and the question is going to be like, how come this is still outstanding? So, make sure you're capturing the action items for each meeting. Make sure you're taking steps right away while it's fresh in your mind to get them worked on with your team. Create those tickets, do those things that then drive the automation that'll help guide it. But, really try to make sure that none of those things that the customer requested falls through the cracks for any extended period of time.
Cool, thank you. So, subscribers that are using the platform for vendor risk management asked, since Cybrance supports managing global vendors and due diligence questionnaires, what are some of the best practices MSPs have used for smaller SMB clients?
So with smaller SMB clients, also take a look at what vendors you're going to take care of. What I'm seeing a lot of that's starting to happen when customers kind of go into that governance risk area, it's not like they're taking on every vendor the customer's working with day one, but oftentimes they're taking on the technology relationships that go beyond their MSP. Their internet carriers, their telecommunication companies that if they're using outside phone vendors, their ERP system vendors, and they're taking on those, risks. Obviously, hosting vendors in your Microsoft 365 and some of the tooling that you might be extending out to them as well. All these can be set up very easily in VCIO Toolbox. What I always say is first look at your customer landscape. What are the vendors that you're using with all of them? Common ones would be Microsoft, AWS, Dell, Lenovo, and almost all these customers have trust centers that you can get the information you need and build a global vendor profile for those customers inside of VCIO Toolbox. Get their SOC 2, review that. You could even, fill out the questionnaire if you want to generate a score. But more importantly, get that information in so those vendors can be approved and you build them once and you can attach them to each one of your customers as you take on vendor management. Then the second step is you got to sit down with the customer and you really got to understand what vendors they want you to help them, review. They may want to extend it to traditional supply chain vendors, and that's great. Just you'll need to know what really needs to be sent to them. You can't necessarily send out our vendor risk management profile that really focuses on technology if we're talking about the vendor that supplies them with produce, if they're a grocery retailer or something like that. But you do have to look at, where they come into play and what risks come into working with that vendor and really tailor your scope to that. You can build those vendors very easy and suppliers very easily into VCIO Toolbox. The process feels reminiscent to what we do in the GRC. You're able to take that vendor risk assessment, attach it as a program to that customer, and then using our delegation tools, you can actually delegate out the entire assessment to the vendor. The vendor now can come in, answer their questions. If you'll be able to track progress, kind of tickle them when they're falling a little bit behind. And then when you get that response in, you're going to be able to look at the scorecard and review that scorecard and responses with your customer. If there are gaps, now you can help the customer understand what the risks are and the gaps that are identified. Customer doesn't know, we know in these assessments, not all questions are equal. And depending on what comes back, the gap could be a really impactful one that has a lot of risk for the customer, a lot of impact for the customer, or it could be something really innocuous, that doesn't really matter within the confines of the relationship. So we really want to help them understand that and present that to them. And then if they're willing to take some of the risk with the customer, we want to build that remediation plan for the vendor. And in doing that, we just build a simple plan of action where we tell them exactly what things that they need to do in order to adhere to what the customer would like to see. They can then make their decision of yes or no, right? Because they may look at you and go, yeah, that outweighs the value of the contract fivefold. So we're not going to do that. And then we can work with our customer to determine whether or not they want to live with that risk. But more importantly, if we do identify, or if the vendor does say that they will remediate that risk, we can now put that into a plan of action that can be shared with both parties. Your vendors, just like your customers, can come into their vendor space through our customer profile, our portal, excuse me, and they can update when they close out those projects. They can provide you with evidence showing they completed those projects. And you really can then, track, are these people on time? Are they falling behind? And really kind of drive that train as well and make sure you're closing any risk that you guys were accepting in a relatively, a lot of times you'll say, hey, you've got 12 months to close on gaps A, B, and C, but we'd like to see gap A done in 6 months. And you can really track those kind of things very simply in the system. So we're at the top of the half hour. Janessa, do you got one last one that's pretty
I
quick?
have
Or
a few more, but one that I definitely want to ask. So, someone specifically asked about action items and how they work in the platform. So they've noticed that the action items section isn't tied to any specific meeting. So they've been adding dates manually to keep track. Is that what's recommended,
so
or?
the action items was really meant to be a free flowing section where you can capture action items when you're in a minute, take action on them, and theoretically, from our seat, it was. And then when you go to the next meeting, you're going to clear the deck on it. You might, have those action items still showing, so you can show remediation was done and update your comments there, and then really get the next meeting's action items in that section. And then at some point, you're going to delete out some of the older ones. That's kind of what our original intent was. It was really just meant to help folks that said, I need a place to capture notes for that meeting. To support that, we built an action items report and we built report tiles for action items as well. So you can integrate the action items into any reporting that you might want to do with your customer. Now, that said, Janessa, we've been hearing about a lot of ways that customers are using the action items field. And I love this because this is where innovation's born from. But man, you guys are using them a lot of different ways and want different experiences. But one of the things that we are looking at is potentially taking those action items. When you close a meeting, it closes out that action item section. So when you come to that next meeting, it's now a blank sheet again. We're also trying to see if, and this would be a little bit further down the road because of some of the automations that we have up in front of it, but we're all on sessions like this. And right now, as we speak, I've got probably two tools in here, and I think I've seen a couple others fire up theirs where we're collecting those notes and action items. And can we bring those things in via an API if you're using a particular service to populate those action items so they can be part of a report? I learned today through a ticket that apparently our character limit, which I thought was pretty good, about 3,750 characters, might not be enough for what they want to put in the action item. So there's some things that we're going to look at that's definitely in areas that we head into 2026. We're going to see if we can continue to improve and make more functional. For all of you on this call, please direct your wish list of what you'd like to do on your action items to Janessa at jsoucy, Soucy, at bciotoolbox.com. She'll be working with the development team to see what things could be done there. But yeah, I mean, our pure intent was capture some action items for this meeting, be able to report on it, swipe, and start over. But that we're seeing that folks are using them in a more living, breathing document format, which is great, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Just we have to make some adjustments to probably better serve you in that manner. All right. So I'm going to ask the question, everybody, and if you could just put a thumbs up in the chat. Did you like this kind of rapid fire Q&A session? Because this is something that we're thinking about doing each month for one of our sessions. You can direct questions you might not want to ask us in real time to Janessa to do this. But we've had some folks that said, hey, it'd be nice if we just kind of did a Q&A periodically and really kind of change, hit some of the subjects that people have that come to Janessa as she runs her partner meetings during the month. So it looks like we're seeing a lot of thumbs ups there, Janessa. I think that's good. So we will do this again next month. And, please, if you do have any questions that you'd like to run through this, I'm going to ask you to submit them to Janessa at jsoucy at vciotoolbox.com. I don't know if you already put that in the chat, Janessa, but maybe you want to do that.
I don't have access to the chat right
You
now.
don't
That's
have
why I'm
access to the
gonna,
chat? How is that possible?
I know. I can see it, I just can't type in it.
Now you can. Now you can. Put in your address in there and, and reach to her just so it doesn't get caught in the roadblock that I am. and, uh, and we'll make sure that we take care of that. For everybody else, I want to thank you for those of you that hung in with me for a little bit longer today and Janessa a little bit longer today. We appreciate you. We love doing these sessions each week, and we appreciate many of you taking time out of your busy days to spend a little of it with us. So thank you for that. For those of you that are new that haven't attended, we do this every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Today was Q&A, but oftentimes we are really usually picking a subject, going deep dive on that subject, and then opening up the floor for any questions that are out there. With that said, I will wish you all a great week. Go out there, meet with your clients, go make money. Janessa, for you, thanks for all you do with our customers, and these questions were great. Thank you for preparing them.
Of
And we'll
course.
see you all again next week.
Bye, everyone.